warm welcome to you, sir. May I now request you to kindly give the introductory remarks. Over to Mr. Shankar Lal.
Thank you for a very nice introduction. I also thank AIMA for inviting me to chair this important session. It is a real pleasure for me to share the stage with such eminent global experts and also interact with a very knowledgeable and lively audience. Before I invite our esteemed panel members, let me briefly share views of the World Bank on this topic. Public procurement represents a substantial share of the government spending and can play a key role in helping countries pursue green, resilient, and inclusive development. Global government procurement spending reached around $14 billion in 2019. And this may be a conservative estimate because the amount has gone up further because of COVID-19 response by many countries. And this is around 15% of the global GDP, gross domestic product. If you see the figure for India, it is around $670 billion. So the volume is very substantial. And also because of reconstruction efforts after COVID-19 pandemic, this may go up many-fold in many countries. So apart from public procurement helping in the delivery of various goods and services for the governments, it can also leverage broader improvements in transparency, accountability, inclusion, resilience, and sustainability. These are the hallmarks of better governance and deepened economic growth and prosperity for any country. A modern public procurement system is a fundamental component of green, resilient, and inclusive government, GRID, what we call in World Bank terminology. Apart from fiscal savings, this promotes government objectives such as resilient and broad-based growth, inclusion of vulnerable groups, support for small enterprises, and environmental sustainability. The potentially catalytic role of procurement has taken on increasing urgency in recent years as governments grapple with the fiscal effect of the global financial crisis and seeks to build back better in the face of worldwide COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing climate crisis. More and more governments are now basing their procurement decisions to maximize value for money, or VFM, where the concept of value goes beyond monetary savings to achieve other policy objectives. Current session outlines the key challenges and opportunities in moving towards modern procurement system around the world to strengthen development effectiveness through better understanding and implementation of procurement reforms and professionalization. In this session, we are going to have 4 presentations with 20 minutes duration each. We will be taking up questions at the end of all the 4 presentations. However, if you are virtually connected, you are free to put your questions in chat box. With this brief introductory work, let me invite the first panel member, Mr. Malcolm Harrison, Group Chief Executive Officer, SIPS UK, to share his presentation. Welcome back to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So good afternoon. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to you today. I've been asked really to talk about how effective procurement organizations, and I guess particularly how skilled professionals are increasingly important in terms of, yes, making economies stronger, but also driving the focus that we increasingly need on supply chains. And it's a different focus today than perhaps it's been over the last, dare I say, 20, 30 years. It shouldn't really have needed a pandemic to get people to appreciate how important it is that supply chains are resilient, but I think that is what we have seen. And I remember back to early on in my career, somebody said to me, the most expensive thing you can ever buy is the one that doesn't turn up, or when it does turn up, doesn't work. And that focus on resilience, and resilience rather than on savings, is, I believe, what has been the hallmark of great procurement organizations and professionals for a long time. And I believe we're now starting to see that come through And indeed, the pandemic has put a focus and a spotlight and a credibility onto the profession that we've probably never seen before. So what then are the real procurement or the priorities for the procurement function in that new context, or this new context that we're now operating in? So firstly, and Shankar, you've just said, it is about value for money. It is about value. It's always been about value. And sometimes that value is through delivering cost savings, but it's always been about value. And increasingly, what we're now seeing is a recognition, not so much by the profession, but I think by the finance organisation, that focus on value and that focus on achieving some of the ESG and sustainability goals as well is really what the priority has to be. We have to ensure that supply chains are robust and resilient, and they're going to get tested again. The horrific war unfolding in Ukraine at the moment is yet again going to challenge the resilience of supply chains. And there will be impacts on global supply chains for sure. And the profession is going to be called upon to manage challenges that we never expected that we were going to have. And then in the environment that we all operate in today, that focus on ethics and that focus on integrity is something which citizens increasingly expect. And I think when you get to a scenario or a time when people are choosing which products they buy, investors are choosing which organizations they invest in, employees are thinking about who it is they want to work for, in part down to the ethical reputation of that organization, then you see how important this is for the procurement profession to ensure that we are operating in an utterly high integrity and ethical way. I talked very briefly about sustainability. I mean, nobody can deny the challenges now which the world is facing from climate change. Look at COP26, look at some of the edicts that came out of COP26 and the imperative of focusing on scope 3 emissions. And scope 3 emissions are typically not within the four walls of your own organization, they sit within the supply chain or your extended supply chains. So I don't believe any organization is ever going to be able to address scope 3 emission challenges and targets without that real focus on the supply chain. And to have that focus on your supply chain, we need really skilled procurement and supply professionals that can manage those challenges. And then looking at the supply base, not as a cost center, not as somebody or organizations that you see as being competitors, but as a source of innovation, a source of new ideas, of new solutions. And I think getting that focus to be about buying based on outputs, based on what is it you're looking for, and allowing your supply base to come up with those innovations is absolutely something that we are going to see more and more of. And as part of that, I do see a much, much greater role for the development of small and medium enterprises. It's often small and medium enterprises that are the innovators, that are the more agile organizations. And the profession has to get used to being able to encourage those very often local, young, innovative SMEs that are absolutely the lifeblood of the innovations and the future of all economies as well. So those are the priorities, I think, for the profession today. It has changed, and it really has changed dramatically over the last 2 or 3 years, definitely impacted by the pandemic. On the other hand, you could say, this is back to where the profession was probably 40 years ago, for those organizations that really put that focus on value, not on cost savings, but on value and resilient supply chains, ensuring that they were set up with the right focus on ethics and integrity. So what are the skills then that we're going to need, and we're going to need in our professionals to be able to deliver against that agenda? So yeah, absolutely, it is that focus on delivering value for money, but more importantly for me, it's about managing relationships. And it's about managing relationships, not just externally with your supply base, but internally with your stakeholders. The bigger challenge, I believe, though, is we're going to see a need to collaborate, and to collaborate more with other parties, even with competitors, in order to be able to manage particularly some of those challenges around sustainability and Scope 3 emissions. We have to have consistent messages going out to our supply base from all of their customers. They don't want to have 200 different messages coming out from customers around issues which are about climate change. And that's going to require procurement professionals to develop the right skills to be able to manage those relationships, not just with suppliers, but even with their competitors as well. And focus on risk is incredibly important. I've said it already this morning, this afternoon, but clearly the Russian invasion of the Ukraine has thrown up a whole lot more risks. And understanding what that then means in terms of the risk to supply chains is absolutely something that procurement and supply professionals need to be able to focus on. And then the skills that you need to focus around sustainable practices, you need to focus on sustainability. It's not quite the same as going out and negotiating a new contract. It's not quite the same as that focus on, am I complying with the local procurement regulations? It is about understanding what the drivers are of your supplier, and not just your supplier, but your supplier's supplier and your supplier's supplier's supplier, all the way down through the supply chain. And it's a different set of skills. It's about asking questions. It's about inquisitiveness. It's about challenging. It's not just about complying with regulations. And I think that's going to make quite a difference in terms of the skill set that we require for the future. And none of this is going to be possible without having the right data, the right systems, being able to unlock those innovative solutions. And again, different skills we're going to need for the future. We did a survey, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. We did a survey recently of our members and said, what are the key skills that you are looking for? And the skills that came through loud and clear were these three. So 51% of people said they were looking for skills in supplier relationship management. 51% of people said it was about communication skills. 47% said it was about negotiating. But communications, change management, supplier relationship management, those are very much the skills that we're going to be needing for the future, and we need to make sure we're equipping our procurement and supply professionals with. So what's going on in the world of global supply chains today? And clearly the pandemic has really made people think about those very long, lean, very low cost, very efficient supply chains which were set up over the last 20, 30 years. And they were set up driven by efficiency, assuming a fairly benign environment where, yeah, there pretty much was either a balance of supply and demand or even a slight excess of supply, where shipping rates were low, prices were low, where containers were freely available, and it was going to be easy to be able to get the container when you wanted it from whichever point you wanted it, leaving to arriving. That's all changed. We've seen container rates go up by a factor of 10 to 20 in terms of price. And more importantly, real challenges in terms of availability. And remember, the most expensive thing you can ever buy is the one that doesn't turn up. So that challenge on whether long, lean supply chains are really the answer, there's a lot of focus on that today. And combine that with I believe quite right focus on supporting local economies and how do we build back better after the pandemic? How do we ensure that we're encouraging local suppliers to be stronger? And all of that is questioning the benefits of long, lean supply chains. We need to ensure that we're absolutely therefore focusing on resilience, and we need to ensure that we have the right data, the right systems, the right transparency to be able to see what's going on at those multiple layers in our supply chains. We need to make sure we're addressing the very important sustainability agenda, and we need to make sure that we are really focusing on buying based on outcomes, and therefore thinking about innovation and thinking about how do you use your supply base to come out with far better innovative solutions to those challenges that every supply chain faces. Risk. Somebody said to me, is this about just in time or is it about just in case? Now, we all know efficient operations are about just in time, but hey, if you can't actually get that thing, then it's about, well, what do I need to build up just in case my supply chain doesn't work? What do I need to do in terms of having alternative suppliers? Yeah. When I entered this great profession some 40 years ago, I was told from very, very early on, never end up with a single supplier. In fact, probably two is not sufficient either. And I think over recent years, driven by that focus on pricing and cost, many organizations have found themselves operating with limited stock and single suppliers. That is not a resilient supply chain. And that won't allow you to manage some of the risks that the world is currently throwing at us. So local sourcing and developing your markets as part of that way of mitigating that risk becomes incredibly important. And that's not simply about putting out a tender and seeing who responds to it. It's actually about working with potential suppliers. It's about potentially investing in suppliers. It's about developing suppliers and developing a supply base, and often a local supply base where there wasn't one before. It will almost certainly mean investment. And where does that investment come from? Is that going to be private sector investment? Is that going to be government investment? And does that investment require some sort of guarantee about offtake over an appreciable period of time to justify the investment and have an acceptable return on investment? And then we're all hearing this focus on in-country value, on social value, on how do we build that better. And yes, this is important for boosting local economies and local economic growth. It's also very important in terms of getting that better handle on risk and building more resilient supply chains. To do this, we're operating in a digitally connected world. And there is no doubt that digitization is one of the key ways of getting that transparency and that visibility of data that we need in order to be able to manage risk. Digitization brings two huge benefits. One is about efficiency and the other is about effectiveness. And efficiency, yes, is about those very repeatable transactional activities which are done day in, day out, which can frankly be automated. And by automating it, we build in efficiency. We also, I think most importantly, we take away the many potential sources of error from the likes of double keying and different versions of data. So technology, to me, digitization has a huge benefit in terms of efficiency. I believe the bigger benefit, though, is in terms of effectiveness. And that's when we're able to get better data. We're able to get quicker data. We're able to get data that allows us to be able to take better sourcing decisions and therefore more effective decisions. So digitization brings, yes, efficiency, but it also brings effectiveness. And it's incredibly important that we focus on both. Data underpins all of this, and ensuring that we do get, not just get the right data available, we're able to interpret it. And that indeed is bringing new roles into the world of procurement and supply management. And we're hearing people talk about, I'm hearing people talk about the need to invest in data scientists, in data analysts, very different people that I think are increasingly going to become part of a core procurement and supply function as we operate in this far more digitized world. Sustainability. The challenges of sustainability, and everybody's been talking about climate change and the importance of reducing carbon emissions. But there's also the importance of focusing on energy reduction, on focusing on responsible use of scarce resources, on focusing on eliminating and reducing waste to landfill. And all of these are tasks which the procurement professional in particular is very, very well versed in. And if ever there was an agenda, the procurement function should be owning, it is the sustainability agenda and that focus on supply chains and ensuring that we're creating supply chains which are truly fit for the future and allow us to manage the resources of our planet in a way that ensures that our children and our grandchildren will be able to live on this planet happily for many, many years to come. Collaboration is I talked about earlier, but I do think that the challenges of climate change are so big that no one organization, no one country can solve on their own. And it is going to require a level of collaboration and collaboration skills that we've never seen before. So how does the Chartered Institute Procurement Supply then come in terms of this skill base? There are absolutely new roles for the profession. And there is a real need for everybody in the profession to acquire those skills and also to stay current. So continuing professional development, the learning of the new context and the new skills which are required for the new context is absolutely something that we as an institute, as a professional body, need to make sure that we're delivering to the profession. And increasingly, we have to do all of this in an online and digital way. So over the last 2 years, we've taken all of our products online. We've taken all of our training online. We can now deliver any one of our courses, and we deliver to you. The last of the exams that we ran, we had people taking 6 exams in 168 countries in the world. And many of those were doing it digitally, using remote invigilation. So online learning, online testing, online training, and it is absolutely the way that we're now operating. And we believe that is way that certainly the young people today want to learn as well. It's a highly effective, highly practical way of learning, and it ensures that we can make sure that we're getting out the right skills, the right training, the right continuing professional development in this new context. We've also got a huge focus on ethics. And we've created an online learning and test. But I always say to people, if you try and do the test without doing the learning, then don't be surprised if you don't do too well in the test. This is not straightforward. And the complexities of today's modern supply chains and the challenges that are thrown at us by climate change, by the disruptions that we're seeing around the planet, and by some of the challenges around topics such as modern day slavery. All of those are issues which the procurement and supply professional has to be cognizant of and has to be able to deal with. And this learning takes you through all of that and gives you a brief test at the end. So we're absolutely there as the professional body to support procurement and supply professionals throughout your professional journey. So in summary, this is an incredibly exciting time for the procurement and supply profession. The pandemic, the disruptions that we've seen in terms of global trade, the Russian war in Ukraine, all of this is throwing challenges at our supply chains in a way that we'd never, ever envisaged. And yes, that means challenges. I think it also means there are huge opportunities for the profession in terms of being able to rise to the challenge and being able to address many of the issues that organizations and countries are being faced by. For me, there are 3 really, really important areas. The first one is about resilience. It is about ensuring that we're building supply chains with multiple sources, with sufficient stock to ensure that continuity of supply. Sustainability is the second key topic. And that's, yes, it's about climate change, but it's also about waste and landfill. It's also about energy reduction. It's also about responsible use of scarce resources. And it's absolutely about water conservation as well. And then that is that challenge of transparency, ensuring that we have the information, we have the data to be able to track what's going on in our supply chain, not just with our suppliers, but our suppliers as well. And all of that requires really good, really well-trained and highly capable procurement professionals. And all I can say is I wish today that I was 40 years younger and starting out on my career, because for sure, this is a great, great profession and it's a great time for the procurement and supply profession. So thank you. I'm glad to be able to have shared that with you today, and I look forward to being able to answer any questions later on.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you. This is very relevant presentation. We actually missed introducing you, so I'm requesting Aima to introduce you as well as the next speaker, who is Mr. Karma Wagdi from the government of Bhutan. So over to Aima.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Very insightful, I must say. Thank you so much once again, Mr. Malcolm Harrison. May I request you, sir, to kindly make your presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to various parts of the world. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Shankar, for giving exclusive invitation to present Bhutan's specific procurement reforms that has been taken place, that is ongoing and would be taking place in the future. So now I will share the screen. Hello, participants. Is it audible?
Yes, we can hear you, Karma.
Okay, thank you very much. As I said, this presentation is specific to the country's journey of procurement in Bhutan. So the outline of the presentation is the objectives and how procurement reform in Bhutan started and what are the specific areas of reform that Bhutan government has undertaken, and then some economic benefits of that along with the reforms. So as all procurement gurus agree that the main objectives of procurement reform is intended that some reform has to be taken to drive the economy to make efficient and smooth in the procurement areas. So in terms of this one, this reform, it is to basically increase the transparency and it will foster greater competition amongst all economic operators in the country. And then as part of the introduction, it is said that to ease the production procurement administration from manual base to electronic base. And as we all agree, it is to ensure the best value for money at the end. So this is just for your information. In Bhutan, the procurement reform really started in 2009. Prior to that, it was just a chapter in the financial management 1988, and in 2009, the first procurement measure reform took place with the financial assistance from World Bank, and in 2015, there were some partial modifications and improvement. And as acknowledged, in 2015, as part of the reform, the first electronic government procurement system was launched. And in 2019, second major procurement reform was launched. And to cope with the current COVID situation, almost all the countries around the world, they have come up with some specific procurement reforms. In Bhutan, we call it Simplified Procurement Reform, Simplified Procurement Rules and Regulations 2020. So what are the specific areas of the procurement reform that in 2019, the Bhutan government has launched was, like many other countries, we have taken a bold step to make the market research and analysis for all the procurement initiatives, taking into accounts of the potentials of the contractors available, having environmental impact, social, economic, and all this. Then in the second thing, it wasn't a mandatory for the procuring agencies to make a prerequisite studies. So in terms of work, it is about 50 million of works and goods, 20 million is subject to all mandatory prerequisite studies. They will have to take into account of all those what we call social, economic, political legislation and all these things, and then environment issues, all these things into account during prerequisite studies. And The third major reform was in the procurement planning. Before this reform, the procurement planning was not at all instituted by the procuring agencies. They just have a small, in the form of a Gantt chart, where they make inadequate planning, but after this, they will have to make a comprehensive procurement planning along with the budget submission. And the other reform was in the form of payment. The most of the economic operators say that while the supply or the contract infrastructure was completed on time, the government never pays on time. So to compensate their loss of financial thing, the government has come up with late interest payment equivalent to the overdraft facilities as per the central bank, that is called Royal Monetary Authority of Bhutan. And the fifth one is the domestic preferences. Earlier, it was only 5% domestic preference given to all the procurement, both works and goods, and now it is increased to 10%. And with this, the domestic preferences, particularly SMEs and all those domestic manufacturers are able to get on board and then have edge over other imported goods. And other one is, we all acknowledge that there is a lack of capacity development in the procurement professionals. So in this, the major step we took was capacity development of any professional, any committee members sitting in the procurement to make a decision. So in that case, it is made mandatory that once you are nominated as the procuring committee decision, then you will have to undergo procurement training mandatory after the 6 months. If not, they cannot sit or they cannot attend any procurement related meetings in that. And the seventh one is specialized subcontracting. We have made it mandatory for any specialized subcontractors to get registered with the Construction Development Board. Otherwise, they will not be allowed to subcontract from the principal contractor to perform any subcontract construction job in Bhutan. And major other one is bid security declaration. How does this function? Is particularly for small category of works and goods. Now the economic operators, or you call it contractors or suppliers, they do not have to submit 2% or the quoted amount equivalent in bank guarantee, demand draft, or cash warrant. But this is just a legal document giving assurance that their bid is valid till the evaluation and award is completed. So if this, after award, the bid is not accepted, then they will be asked to deposit the equivalent amount of bid security within 14 days. If not, they will be excluded from two years from that particular procuring agencies. And the most teething issues which all contractors or suppliers fail is in the earlier procurement rules and regulations. They can claim, or the minimum days the bills can be cleared by the procuring agency was 30 days. So recognizing their financial positions, now the Bhutan government has reduced to 50%. So that is from 30 days to 15 days. So, but however, this will be subject to complete bill submission, like all the bills are verified, no arithmetical error, and it is duly verified by appropriate level of approval authorities. So only then it will be counted 15 days. Otherwise, the bills will be sent back to the respective initiators. And one of the major IT enabling that Mr. Malcolm also said in the presentation, said that IT is indispensable at this age of technology. So recognizing this one, Bhutan government has launched the electronic government procurement system in 2017, as I mentioned in the procurement reform journey. So as of now, this is just for statistics. So all the government procuring agencies are mandated to invite all the tenders through the EGP system. And we have also a dedicated monitoring team in my department to oversee who all are not abiding by the EGP rules and regulations. If any procuring agencies invite any tender like before on a paper base, the tenders shall be treated as cancelled, and we will not allow them to move ahead. So this is just some of the figures and then data that we have now. By July 2022, the entire government procuring agencies, which will include even the lowest level of administration, we call it GEOX. In the last row or on the left side, you see we have 205 GEOX, but as of now we have only trained 36. By July 2022, entire 205 GEOX would have been trained, and the entire whole government procuring agency will be using the electronic government procurement system. So if you look at this, the value of procurement is almost 67.47 million USD as of now. This is not including the donor funded projects, which are externally, like ADB, World Bank, and all this. So the proposed reform in 2022 is we are going to do away the retention money, particularly on the construction infrastructures. How this is going to impact is because to give more capital or cash in the contractors running the business. And how do we take care of the liquidity? Defect liability period. We will be mandating all the contractors to renew the performance security until the defect liability period is over. And other one is e-invoice. Through the EGP system, the entire procurement system will be covered, like from annual procurement plan to tender, award, contract management, and then finally invoice. And then it will be integrated with the electronic public expenditure management, where the final payment will be cleared through that system. And the other one is all financial instruments like bank guarantee, performance security, all these things are submitted through online in the EGP system by the financial institutions. So we do not accept any hard or paper-based instruments. It is all done through the financial instruments. Only then the contractors or suppliers will be able to submit the final bids through the system. And the other one is construction management software for goods and services. This is specific to the goods and services. Of course, the works is down there. And the single source of legal documents verification, like contractors' license, whether they have the legal basis to do construction or not, whether they have fulfilled the government tax clearance or not. These are all done through one single source of system check that is called Bhutan Integrated License System, BILS. And other one was we had that financial threshold. Suppose if it is small procurement threshold, small government agencies can decide themselves, but if the threshold is too big for them, then they had to refer to the higher authority. Now, in this proposed reform, these referrals have been removed for ease of doing their procurement businesses, because it really eats away their procurement time and all this. And the other one is, again, we are coming up with the construction management software for works. And other one is, I'm sure those who are familiar with the Bhutanese award of construction works, once you are technically qualified, that technical points are not carried forward to decide and combine with the financial points. So now we are taking this technical points around 20 percentage to add to the financial, and now it is not necessarily that the lowest evaluated or the lowest financial offer contractor will be getting the contract award. So with this reform, we expect that the established contractors who are financially sound, technically capable, will be awarded, so that the government construction works are delivered on time. And the last one is the World Bank will be carrying the MAPS assessment of Bhutan, which is supposed to launch was supposed to launch last February, but unfortunately because of some problem we could not. So I think we will be launching this MAPS assessment Bhutan by end of this March. So we are expecting these maps that Bhutan's category of doing the procurement business will be promoted from grade B to A. As of now, we are in B. I'm sure Shankar and other colleagues who are familiar with Bhutan's procurement grading will know this one. So with this, I would like to thank to all the participants who are attending physically in IMA and those who are attending virtually. So once again, thank you very much, and we'll take the question later on if there is any. Shankar, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Karma. Very interesting presentation. So congratulations for such an impressive reform journey. Back to IMA for introducing next speaker, who is Mr. Nicholas Penagas.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Karnavangdi, for that wonderful presentation. We now request our next panelists to kindly join us and make the presentation. May I introduce our next panelist to you, ladies and gentlemen, the heads of MAPS Secretariat at OECD, Mr. Nicholas Penagas, who is going to be addressing in and around MAPS initiative and its effect in overall economic development of countries. But before I ask him to do so, may I say a few words about him. Mr. Nicholas Penagas is the head of the MAP Secretariat housed at the OECD, as mentioned earlier, where he is responsible for maintaining the methodology and carrying out the quality assurance process of MAPS assessment. Before joining the MAP Secretariat, he was the head of Latin America at the Open Contracting Partnership. Prior to that, he was the Deputy Director of Colombia's National Procurement Agency. Nicholas holds a double major in Industrial Engineering and Mathematics and a Master's in Sustainable Development from the University of Paris, Dupain. Most welcome to you, sir. Very warm welcome, and may I now request you to kindly give the presentation. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation, and thank you for inviting us to this wonderful event. I would like to speak today at the Global Procurement Summit about the methodology for assessing procurement systems. So I hope you're seeing my screen now. And I really want to make the point about how MAPS is related to better procurement and to improved development in our countries. So for that, the first thing that I would like to emphasize is about why procurement matters. And it matters because of several important elements. So the first one is because it is a key lever for development when we think about development in monetary and in economic terms. You will see there in different parts of the world how procurement is really one of the biggest areas in GDP. In Asia, particularly, it's around 20% of GDP, the size of procurement within the size of the economy in Asian countries. And this has even expanded with the pandemic in many countries because of more purchases of medical equipment, of vaccines. These numbers have even gone higher. But leaving apart the purely monetary terms of why procurement matters, let's also bear in mind that procurement is the only way to materialize public policy. So when a government is seeking to do something, is seeking to improve education, is seeking to improve health, the only way in which it can deliver those promises is by contracting something with the private sector in order to deliver those goods and services to citizens. And this is closely linked to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So not only when we think about procurement, and if you go and look for the word procurement within the Sustainable Development Goals, you will see that in target 12.7, there's an explicit mention to sustainable procurement. Not only should we think that procurement is related to that target, but it is in fact related to all of the targets. Again, when we think that in order to improve sanitation or in order to improve well-being for the citizens, governments need to contract with companies to provide for specific goods and services. And also, of course, to maintain how government is working with goods and services that are required for government officers to continue working, which would require laptops, furniture, buildings, etc., etc. This is also a key lever for specific, and when used strategically, procurement can be used to improve outcomes related to innovation in the country and also to social and environmental outcomes. Inclusion of certain groups or also green procurement and even meeting climate targets. So right now, I want to introduce MAPS, which is the methodology for assessing procurement systems. MAPS is part of an assessment system which is used by governments to evaluate their economic and financial systems. So this enables them to ensure accountability, report to their constituents, identify opportunities for reform, and really identify which aspects they might have weaknesses in, so that they can improve and really apply the efforts to those specific topics, and also monitor progress by specific indicators that may be applied over time. So when we think about these assessment systems, maybe some of you are familiar with the ones related to revenue and tax, that's TADAT, public finance in general, the PIFA assessments, and MAPS is the one used universally to capture how procurement systems are working in countries. And this is really to assess how procurement is working in any country. So it can be applied at any level of government, be it a city, a state, or a country, for all public procurement systems, regardless of the level of development of the country. So this is really important. MAPS started in 2003 and was led by the OECD and the World Bank. And in 2018, there was a revision of the methodology, which resulted in the methodology that is currently in use. And one of the key features is that it's universal. So it's not only for certain countries to use, but really any country, be it a fragile state, be it a small state, or even developed countries have used MAPS and may use MAPS to assess their procurement systems. Again, it is intended to be a reform tool to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of public procurement. So really identifying strengths and weaknesses of a procurement system and also encourage dialogue among stakeholders to focus on where should the efforts of reform be placed. And finally, it is a recognized assessment that uses comprehensive set of indicators, of objective indicators that assessors may use to, and after engaging with various stakeholders, so this is not only with government, but also with civil society, private sector, engaging with all of those stakeholders, identify those key strengths and weaknesses of a procurement system. And it is there's a guarantee of quality for all of these assessments. And that guarantee is ensured by the MAP Secretariat alongside an international group of experts to provide for the assessments to have a homogeneous level of quality. So MAPS has been used, and this is actually the map of where MAPS has been used across the world, the revised methodology. And if you see, there are several countries that have already undergone the application of the tool, which are finalizing or submitting their reports to the MAP Secretariat. Some of them are already published on our website for you to read, and others are planning or ongoing assessments right now being carried out in several parts of the world. There are several elements to the MAPS methodology. So right now I will only present on the structure of the methodology, but do feel free to go into our website and check the full methodology. It's open for use for any of you to consult and read how it works. It is based on 4 pillars. 4 pillars that the MAPS partners, which is the group of multilateral development banks, and also countries that both apply MAPS or have applied MAPS and also support the use of MAPS throughout the world. They see that these are the 4 elements that any procurement system must comply with. So the first one is a sound legal, regulatory, and policy framework. And when you see there in each of the pillars, there are indicators and sub-indicators containing specific questions and assessment criteria for assessors to identify the strengths and weaknesses I was speaking about. So the second pillar is about the institutional framework and management capacity. So it deals with the institutions that are actually procuring, the institutions that are regulating procurement, and also how this is linked with the general public financial management in the country. And also related in this second pillar to the management capacity, that is to the professionalization, to the, and related again to several of the topics presented by Malcolm in the first presentation today. All of those elements that are required for procurement officers to really procure in the best way possible. And this is not only from their end on a career path, for example, on how to properly advance and gain skills during their career, but also how the procurement agency or regulator provides for assistance, manuals, guidance for these officers. Pillar number 3 about procurement operations and market practices is the one where assessors really go deep into real procurement processes and check whether what's said in those best practices or possibly in a legal and regulatory framework is really happening in real procurements. So taking a sample of procurement operations, they check whether there's complete evidence that certain clauses are respected, that certain information is disclosed, etc., etc. And also, this pillar is devoted to understanding how the suppliers are engaging with the public market. If there are enough suppliers, if they know how and where to bid or to present their information, if there are any constraints related to their participation in procurement. And finally, the fourth pillar is about accountability, integrity, and transparency, which has 4 sub-indicators and 17 sub-indicators related to audit and internal and external control, and also very important, the role of civil society within the procurement system and also the general anti-corruption framework in a country. So what I've just presented is the core MAPS framework, which is complemented by 6 supplementary modules, which were planned back in 2018 when the revision process was concluded. 2 of those are already live and ready for use, which are the Sustainable Public Procurement supplementary module and the module related to professionalization of the procurement function. So the MAP Secretariat started operations in late 2020, and we offer support. We are housed within the OECD and offer support to country teams to plan and manage MAPS assessments, and also throughout the quality assurance process that starts early on with the concept note to plan an assessment and goes all the way until the final assessment and reviewing that that final assessment complies with all the elements of the methodology. So for that, we also provide not only the methodology, which is translated into several languages, but also several guidance documents and templates to guide assessors when they want to use MAPS. All of those are available on our website, mapsinitiative.org. Some quick points of completed assessments so that you can see quick insights about the assessments. The first one is that a well-developed legal framework does not always equal a well-functioning procurement system in practice. So many times reformers focus only on reforming a law, whereas it is also important to see the rest of the pillars and how they are working, because many times countries might have a very good law, but it is not working well because of other factors. Point number 2 is that even the most advanced countries, as we've seen, and even the most developed countries, show room for improvement in their procurement system. So this is not only intended for use in some countries, and this is not only when countries see in an assessment that might show some gaps. They should also know that all countries present some gaps in certain indicators. So let's say that they should not be afraid of seeing that, but they should really use that information in order to prioritize their reforms. MAPS is universal, but each assessment is different, and that's why MAPS includes a country context chapter, which is important when formulating feasible recommendations for the country. The validation is key to complete the report and to build consensus among stakeholders, so that those validation workshops at the end to present the insights to in-country stakeholders are very important within the MAPS process. And finally, MAPS can serve as a tool, actually, because of speaking with those different stakeholders to build consensus internally, and also being a recognized international assessment to build consensus with international partners to improve procurement and to build consensus of what is the most important strategic action plan for improved procurement. So once a MAPS report is finalized, it is important that it is really used for reform. So we really want to emphasize that topic, and that's why we strive to approve reports that comply with the methodology and publish them so that they are known by in-country and also international stakeholders. So just a couple of examples of different countries that have used MAPS, and you will see these reports published on our website. So I invite you to take a look at those reports, and also to the country case that we've drafted that distill the most important elements of these reports. So the first example is Lebanon. Lebanon has experienced a recent multi-factor crisis, not only related with procurement, but with different elements in the country. But they understood that procurement lies at the heart of what they need to improve. And that's why they wanted to look for ways of diagnosing their procurement system and understanding where to put the effort of reform. And after speaking with several partners, including France, the World Bank, and other partners, they saw that MAPS was the tool to apply in order to identify those key elements that they needed to improve. So that's why after MAPS was applied, and with the MAPS validation stage that brought several stakeholders to the table to discuss about the key elements that needed to be addressed, a new procurement law was approved by Parliament and is being now applied along with a strategic action plan to reform procurement that was completely informed by the MAPS findings. So this is really a key example of how MAPS can be used to improve procurement and, of course, to bring development outcomes to the country, which are central, as I was speaking at the introduction of this presentation. And briefly, to finalize this presentation, I would like to put a spotlight on one of the several elements that we might speak about when thinking about procurement. But right now, I'd like to focus on the topic of sustainability. Sustainability, understanding that right now, development, we cannot think about development without a sustainability aspect. And sustainability is taken care of in two parts in the assessment. So one of them is in the core assessment, when I presented you those pillars in the core framework. In pillar 1, there's indicator 3 with sub-indicator 3A, and in pillar 3, indicator 9, devote to topics related to sustainability. So they really, the assessors should try to understand when assessing procurement in the country. When assessing those indicators, they should try to identify whether there are sustainable public procurement strategies in place, frameworks and tools to operationalize procurement, but also, as I was explaining, the key elements of whether those elements are taken care of in specific procurements. That is taken care of in indicator 9, and assessors should look at whether those procurements include aspects related to sustainable public procurement. For example, sustainability criteria, if they are used in a balanced manner, or whether contract clauses include sustainability considerations where appropriate. And if you see those elements and you think about concrete examples, so I brought here some of the Moldovan report that was recently published, carried out by the World Bank and available on the mapsinitiative.org website. It includes some strengths and weaknesses related to how sustainable procurement is being carried out in Moldova. So, for example, it says that there's regulation that allows for sustainability criteria, that there are guidelines available for contracting authorities, and even guidelines more specifically about topics including calculating life cycle costs. But on the weaknesses, which are some topics that Moldova is trying to concentrate their efforts on right now, is that there is no specific strategy dedicated to sustainable public procurement, that there is no requirement to consider sustainability, although it's possible, it's not actually required, and there's no evidence that there is actual use of those sustainability criteria. And also that the e-procurement system is only allowing for price criteria right now. So even if the legal framework allows for other criteria, including sustainable criteria, the procurement system has a gap in relation to that point. And finally, to conclude with an example from Norway, which also undertook both the core maps and also the sustainable public procurement supplementary module, and used those assessments to understand that there were some gaps related to how their officers were understanding sustainable procurement and were able to apply sustainable procurement. So they came up with an action plan launched in September 2021, which includes the use of help desks the use of tools to guide their officers and to answer specific questions related to how can they apply sustainable public procurement in practice. So I would really like to invite you to follow us on social media to see and read the latest reports. And if you happen to be interested in applying maps in your countries, please contact us. As the last speaker was telling you, Bhutan is starting alongside with the World Bank a maps assessment. India has also undergone one, which we expect that will be published very soon. So many countries might be able to apply this tool to understand how procurement is working in their countries, and may also use information that is readily available on our website to understand the procurement system and also how to improve it. Thank you very much.
Shri Samuel Praveen Kumar is with the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare since last 2 months as Joint Secretary, having joined the ministry through the late re-entry scheme of Government of India and looking after the rain-fed farming system division. Very warm welcome to you, sir. I now request you to make the presentation to our audience. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Respected Chairman of the session, my fellow panelists, esteemed gathering at the Lalit Hotel and all those who have joined online. If I can have my slides thrown up on the screen, please. Yes. So I'll be deliberating upon the public procurement as an enabler for economic development, which will be covering the food and agriculture sector. Now, we have been hearing speakers speak on the public procurement aspects, referring to the goods and services. Of course, the activities remain same, but the players and the purpose is different in my case. The players here will be the producers, the farmers, and of course, the other end of the spectrum, the consumers, the hungry stomachs. And therefore, the purpose is, the objective of this procurement is to fill up the hungry stomachs in the country. Next, please. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Now, a public procurement entails spending the taxpayers' money on goods, services, and infrastructure, and forms the backbone of our government, a well-functioning government. It contributes to a level playing field for the private sector and for delivering effective services to the public. This all applies to general public procurement when we refer to goods and services, because they contribute for the development of the economy. And the public procurement practices, the kind of practices that we adopt will decide the quality of goods and services. Now, when we talk about public procurement of food grains, especially in the agriculture sector, majorly constitutes food grain procurement. If we look at the setup, the basket, the procurement basket of the government largely comprises of the staple food, that is the rice and wheat, which constitutes about 80% of the procurement. Remaining comes from pulses, coarse grains, millets, cereals, etc., minor millets. Now we can move on to the next slide. I'll be focusing only on the few bright spots in the food and agri sector. Of course, this is a topic wherein you have a lot of issues related with procurement, a lot of debatable things as to whether government should continue with this procurement policy, how to improve the existing procurement policy, how to bring in reforms in procurement of food grains. But largely, I'll just give you the contours of what actually is happening in the government thought process, and what is the way forward for bringing in reforms in this sector. Now, one of the major reforms that has come up in the recent years, in fact, it is in the year 2018, that government decided that they will work on the principle of 150% of the cost of cultivation while procuring food grains. Now, this is basically because in the context of, Indian farming community, where 86% of the farmers belong to the small and marginal, farmers. So there is a necessity for the government to actually take care of the vulnerable section of the farmers. I mean, 86% of the farmers are small and marginal, and when I mean small and marginal, holding less than 2 hectares of land holding. Now, despite the pandemic and other, economic disturbances globally, one good thing that has happened to the country, India, is, the urbanization and, the political support for providing food security, which has topped the agenda of government. The agriculture and food sector has always remained bright. The food grain production also has shown tremendous growth. It has reached 310.74 in 2021, and we are expected to reach an all-time high of 316 this financial year. And given the fact that we may be requiring around 340 to 350 million tons to feed the population by 2025, we are on track from agriculture point of view. And majorly, as I said, rice and wheat constitute the bulk of the procurement activities, and paddy has reached an all-time high of 895.83 in 2021, and in case of wheat during the Rabi season, it has been 389.92 during 2021, and this is supposed to further increase in the years to come. Next, please. Now, the prime objective of any government to ensure that the farmers, the producers, get a remunerative price is actually the main objective for taking up the procurement activity. Otherwise, the farmers will be subjected to, distress sale at the market level, and there will be exploitation of the farmers, and the marginal and small farmers are likely to get exploited more. Secondly, the government also would like to ensure that the citizens of the country have food security. Now we are also talking about nutritional security, because food is one thing, but providing them wholesome nutrition is another part of the exercise. The entire procurement scheme of things, as evolved from a calamity-oriented policy, which was more to overcome shortage of food grains, to an instrument of delivering equitable development. Now, the central government has got a price policy mechanism. It is fixing a price, as I said, 150% of the cost, and takes up the activities. And these activities are actually classified into two: one centralized procurement, where the central agencies are involved in the procurement, like Food Corporation of India, or NAFED, which procures oilseeds and pulses. Or there is another system called as decentralized procurement system, which is the states being entrusted with the job of taking up the procurement activities. Now, this has been done as a part of the reform, because entirely the center does and then distributes, there are certain inconsistencies and inefficiencies in the system. So it was decided that probably if we can try out decentralized system, where the states can also pitch in and can do the set of procurement activities to meet the requirement of food grains for their population. So that's how the DCP system of procurement has come in. Next, please. Some of the initiatives which the government has taken to actually reform the present regime of extending MSP indiscriminately is to have a price support mechanism for other crops, pulses, oilseeds, and copra. The necessity for this has come because the need has been felt for diversifying the crops. We have been too largely dependent on rice and wheat, and that has got its own environmental impacts on the soil and water from agri perspective. So to overcome this, the government has brought in the scheme of having procurement of pulses, oilseeds, and other crops. Then there is another scheme, that is price deficiency payment scheme, that has also been brought in by government for the oil seeds to be procured at MSP. And if the farmer is not able to get MSP for his product, then the differential between the selling price and the MSP will be reimbursed by the government. And to also encourage the private stockists, there was a pilot scheme. Of course, it has not kicked off so well as expected. But this is also likely to bring in certain efficiencies. I mean, we wanted to leverage the private sector efficiencies into the government public procurement system. The government has almost, the guarantee has increased to 45,550 crores since this, launch of this last 3-4 years performance. Can we move on to the next slide, please? I also wanted to highlight, of course, it may be more like, marketing the government, but the efforts of government are worth mentioning. So I thought I'll just take a couple of minutes to highlight the record procurement activities that have been taken up by the government. 112.63 lakh metric tons of pulses were procured between 16 and 21. There was a time when pulses were beyond affordable reach for the common man, especially in the year 15-16 when prices started skyrocketing to 200 rupees per kg for red gram tur dal. Similarly was the case oil seeds. Even today oil seeds, India is having deficit. We are required to import oil seeds from other countries for producing edible oil. So to that extent, 59.2 lakh metric tons of oil seeds procured during this 5 years is also the signifies the importance the government is attaching to the procurement of pulses and oil seeds besides rice and wheat. We have built up a buffer stock of 20 lakh metric tons in the last 5 years, again to supply through the PDS for the welfare of vulnerable sections of the society. Next, please. There has been a historic rise in MSPs just to cover the cost. The cost of cultivation has been increasing day in, day out because of the increase in input costs, especially the fertilizers, the pesticides. So to cover that, the MSP now is providing you in the range of 50 to 85% return over the cost of production. Probably next slide will give you an idea about what exactly is the rise for each crop. Can you please show the next slide, please? These are the MSPs for the Rabi crops, wheat, masoor, gram. If you see, it's almost wheat, it is 100% of the cost of cultivation. The lowest being safflower, 50%. But nonetheless, the government is committed to ensure that the cost of cultivation is, well covered and the farmer is able to sustain himself. And then, in fact, this is one of the areas, by which the government is targeting to double the farmer's income. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to the, helping the farmers to even discover a right price besides the government channels of procurement. Government has done a lot of work in regulating the markets and also bringing in the electronic national agriculture market platform, by which transparent price can be discovered for the produce in the existing market ecosystem. And government has done tremendously well in registering more than 1.72 crore farmers since the beginning of this ENAM, and we have about 2.13 lakh sellers registered. So the average purchases or the traders who actually quote for the produce of farmers is around 3 to 4 per purchase, and that keeps growing because of the reach of this ENAM. A person sitting in probably Delhi can purchase a stock from Andhra Pradesh or maybe from Kerala deep down south, which otherwise is not reachable. So that way ENAM has been very helpful in helping the farmers, especially those outside the ambit of MSP. Rice, wheat and pulses, you have spices, you have other set of commodities for which the trading can happen through the ENAM. Next, please. Now, the second part of the spectrum after the procurement is done is, of course, to distribute these food grains through a system called as public distribution system. And over the years, this has become a very integral part of government's policy for managing its food economy. Now, India is a very vast country, and we have a lot of people still under the poverty line. So we need to provide them subsidized food grains, and also to ensure that the food grain prices are stabilized in the country. Otherwise, the market forces will dictate and certain staple foods may go beyond reach. And there is also illegal marketing that happens in the food grain sector. So the government has got an eye on that also, so that such kind of illegal marketing activities can work through an efficient public distribution system. Next, please. Now, this is the whole food grain supply chain, right from farmers to the stock being brought to the procurement centers and then transported to the warehouses, silos. again distributed to the deficit states from the surplus states through rail transportation. So there's multiple handling of food grains at various levels till it reaches the end consumer through the fair price shops. Now, government largely faces, flack for, inefficiency in its procurement operations as well as PDS. They are largely due to the inefficiency in the system, network, where you have inadequate infrastructure, excessive complexity of procedures and ineffective procurement systems in place. And of course, the low penetration of information technology in the whole supply chain network. Now, a lot of efforts have been taken from the government sector side to improve the infrastructure. In fact, as one of the reforms, it has been decided that from 2025 onwards, the wheat stocks will be stored only in bulk silos and not in conventional warehouses, because we have a good technology developed for wheat storage. So this will help in curbing down the post-harvest losses in wheat, and also to minimize, operational inefficiencies, operational losses, all those kind of things. Further, there is a lack of planning and inappropriate management, which is also felt necessary to be addressed, and inefficient procurement systems due to poor storage facilities. Sometimes we don't have covered storage when the surplus procurement activity happens. And as you're aware, procurement in the country is open-ended, especially for rice and wheat. So that further complicates the things. Even the inadequate and ill-equipped vehicles are, posing difficulties in having an efficient supply chain. And a lot of importance is being given for GPS, equipped vehicles, modern vehicles, so that we are able to overcome these difficulties. Now, moving forward, insofar as food grain supply chain is concerned, can you show the next slide, please? The main focus of government is to address the inadequacies and inefficiencies in the existing system, right from procurement till distribution of food grains to the end consumer. Now, when it comes to the policy reforms that government will have to seriously look in, because we have an open-ended procurement policy, there is a need to actually revisit this, and government has been very seriously thinking on this. There are certain reforms coming up, lined up. In fact, the farm laws that were withdrawn subsequently was one of the steps towards this, to kind of have a market-driven economy, wherein the farmers will be having an option for selling their produce beyond the limits of the APMCs, where they have got tagged with. And then also to incentivize the farmers to have diversification of crop, not to depend entirely on rice and wheat, which has put a lot of stress on the ecosystem, especially on the resources available for agriculture, soil, water, and all other supplies. And of course, with climate change, we need to also redesign our entire set of activities to become, say, climate smart. And the offtake of government, after the PDS supplies has always been not matching with the procurement, because procurement is open-ended. So there are limited, actually, kind of options for disposal. Either you do it through a transparent liquidation policy. Presently, what is being done is through the open market system, beyond what is actually released in the PDS. And then, of course, exports. But again, you have the WTO restrictions and other things. So exports is not actually an option. But then the government has to think on limiting the procurement activity to the targeted group, only to certain set of crops, or something like that. Under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana during the COVID times, the offtake was as high as 93 million tons. But it is a one-off thing. We don't see the pandemic, continuing beyond few months. And so, since we feel that we are reaching the stage of endemic, so the original normal will come back, and therefore we think that we'll have to look at other ways of doing this procurement in a more efficient manner. The second aspect is the PDS aspect, where we can actually bring in some kind of efficiency into the system, is through engaging a vibrant network of self-help groups under the National Rural Livelihood Missions, who can be actually interested with the last mile distribution of PDS food grains. There's a lot of leakage, diversion, and all those issues that keep coming up time and again from various states. So to address this, probably the option is either to engage the self-help groups or also to engage FPOs FPOs is coming up in a big way in India. We've got a target about to build 10,000 FPOs by 2025. Not only from production point of view, but even post-harvest management. So they can play a vital role in the supply chain rebuilding so that our efficiency is further improved. Now to conclude, in our country, we need the system sustainability. We need to build a sustainable system based on 3 dimensions or taking into account 3 dimensions, that is the economical, social and environmental. Economic sustainability is very important because procurement activity involves huge sum of public resources. Now the public resources are very limited and it's not possible for us to actually divert the entire funds the government has got at its disposal for procurement of food grains to feed the hungry stomachs. Yes, it is important to feed hungry stomachs, but at the same time, we'll have to also evolve a system by which we are not compromising with the government funds only exclusively for food subsidy or for procurement. So the solution lies in the end market driven strategies, like allowing ENAM, like allowing marketing, in the trade area by the farmers, where the private people can come in and purchase the grains at remunerative prices. So these kind of things, and also to encourage the farmers going for diversification. The second critical area which is to be addressed is the social sustainability. Again, India is a huge country, and more than 1/4 of the population is below the poverty line. So inclusive growth through equitable access to the resources and markets is going to be critical. And we can't exclude certain sections of the society, and again there will be unrest. So FPOs is going to be one big real thing for the country, because farmers collectives, when farmers, individually small and marginal farmers may not be having that kind of a bargaining power or collective power. If they form FPOs, then they can, really serve as entrepreneurs. They can serve as business entities in not only taking care of the production side requirements, but also from the disposal side. And lastly, the environmental sustainability is very critical, because we have been facing global flag, on several fronts. There is a need for developing green technologies and also to reduce our carbon footprint. Water has come under tremendous stress. We need to develop technologies like micro irrigation, soil conservation, and minimize the post-harvest losses, so that our entire this procurement and distribution as an activity not only becomes economically viable, socially sustainable, but also environmentally friendly. So these are the challenges that we face while we go forward, and the government is fully committed and fully equipped in meeting these challenges, in addressing these challenges through policy reforms, through digitization, and through various other strategies. So that's it from my side. Over to the chairperson of the panel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. So we have few minutes left. So let us take few questions. So let us start with the chat box. First question is for Malcolm. This question is actually very interesting question. It is about how to take care of the challenges of incorporating interest of silent stakeholders, that is the future generations. Since we are talking about sustainability and reducing the carbon footprint, so how we should take care of the future generations through public procurement?
So what do you mean silent stakeholders? Because
they don't exist as of today. They will be coming in next generation, future generations.
I think the issues of climate change are very real today. I think you only need to talk to people in their anybody in their teens, and they'll tell you how important climate change is. So I think the challenges are well known. Look, as like I said in my presentation, when you get people clearly making decisions on what products they're going to buy or what companies they're going to work for, based in part on how that company is handling issues around climate change and sustainability, then it's very real. I mean, look, my 20-something-year-old daughter went around our house removing all the bottles that we had, or only 2 actually, of a very well-known and branded version of washing up liquid, because she said it's got phosphates in it. So look, the issues are very real. They're there. It's now. It's not about the future. It's about now. You don't need to wait for the next generation.
Thank you. So second question is again very interesting. Currently, public and private sector procurement professionals require slightly different skill sets. At least in developing countries, I think they are different cadres. Do you foresee a situation in future when these two will become a single set of professionals?
Do you want me to answer that one as well, Shankar?
Yes, it is for you.
Okay. So look, I think the skill set's the same, the context is different. And I've worked in both public and private sector. So there's no difference in the skill set. The difference is that in the public sector, you're working in a regulated environment where you have a set of laws, a set of regulations that you have to comply with. In the private sector, you will have, any organization will have their policies, their procedures, their principles, and you have to follow whatever those policies and procedures are. The skill set that a procurement and supply professional needs is not different. What you have to be able to do, though, is to recognize the different constraints of the different context, and therefore put the appropriate focus in place for that context.
Thank you. So let us go to Karma now. So there are two questions for you also. First question is how the next generation reforms in Bhutan can advance the empowerment of domestic businesses and also attract the international bidders through procurement reform. So how you can achieve these two things? And second question is how you are controlling the delays in contract award decisions, particularly for civil works. Over to you.
Thank you, Shankar. As Malcolm said, it depends upon the context of the country's development thing. So as of now, we have just promoted the domestic preference from 5 to 10%, and the economic operators are really not familiar with this. So this has been really a difficult time for us to really make it impactful of these domestic preferences. And for the international bidders, as of now, through EGP, they cannot register because we lack some legal documents to be verified whether the firm is really established in that particular country or not. Because many of the firms, some they try, but we found that they have no legal establishment in countries like Argentina or some African countries. So they are just trying to play with us in the system, and I suspect there are some hackers playing around that one. Can I have next question, Shankar?
Yeah, second question was how you are controlling the delays in contract award decision, particularly for civil works.
Okay, as per the simplified procurement rules and regulations, we have reduced the tendering process from 30 days to 10 days, and the evaluation has to be completed within 5 days. So these are some of the expansionary fiscal policies intervention that, to generate more employment and to fast track that award of contract. We have reduced that to 5 days. Any project, they have to complete the evaluation within 5 days and then make the award decision within 5 days and then sign the contract in next 3 days. So these are some of the interventions the government has really put it in effort to cope with the current situation. Thank you. Over to you, Shankar.
Yeah, thank you, Karma. Questions for Nicholas now. We have two questions for you also. First question is MAPS tool as it is today is more relevant for a country, but many countries have federal structure. So is there a plan to customize the MAPS tool for subnational governments in future? That is first question. And second is what is the demand for the new supplementary modules? How many assessment have started using the supplementary modules? Over to you.
Thank you. So on the first question, maps can be used right away in subnationals. It has indeed actually been used in assessments in India, in Ethiopia, that have been applied to the national system, but have also gone into several states, so as to have a comprehensive view of the whole country. But maps, so we back to your question, so we are not envisioning any specific adjustment because we see that it's completely
Nicholas,
possible.
just to clarify, assessment of a country and where you are assessing states as part of the country assessment, that is fine. But suppose you have to assess only a state of, say, India or a state of Ethiopia. In that situation, it becomes slightly difficult to apply the tool as it is.
I wouldn't say so. Actually, we have the IDB, for example, was planning an assessment in a state in Brazil using exactly the same methodology. Of course, you might see that sometimes it's in the methodology you will find the word country, but that can be actually replaced by state. And many times we actually use the term jurisdiction so that it's a city, state, or country. So regardless of the level of government, the tool can be applied completely.
Sure. Second question was supplementary modules.
Yeah. So the supplementary modules, as we said, we have 6 planned or that were planned. 2 of those have already been published: sustainable public procurement and professionalization. They have already been applied in Norway, in Peru, and there's more demand coming. We know that Senegal will start to apply professionalization, the professionalization supplementary module. Something to keep in mind is that the professionalization supplementary module is the only one right now that can be applied without a previous core maps. So that's important because some countries might want to apply the sustainable public procurement module, but they would need first to go through a core maps, and this is because many of the indicators draw on specific information that is coming from the core maps. So we have indeed heard of countries, but more right now, as said, professionalization starting in Senegal, and the tool can be applied for any of the countries that have already used the core maps, or for any of the countries that are currently undergoing a map assessment or planning a core map assessment. They could, on top of that, plan a sustainable public procurement module assessment.
Thank you. So now question for Mr. Kumar. First question is, procurement of food grain in India is a very sensitive subject. So how you suggest to maintain the balance between the public procurement principles like economy and efficiency, and all with the sensitivity which is attached with the any procurement of the food grains or agri products? So that is the first part. And second part is how we can incentivize through the public procurement policies to minimize the waste, particularly for the perishable commodities. So these 2 are 2 questions for you. I think you are muted.
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. So I got the question. See, the public-private partnership is also going to be very critical in food sector. Now, that is what government is very keen to rope in the private sector also, and that is why I was highlighting about the procurement through the private stockist scheme, wherein the private sector can also come in, because largely the private sector sees the entire public procurement as a very inefficient set of activity, that the government is not able to do it very efficiently, and a lot of inadequacies and inefficiencies are there. So we want to leverage the private sector efficiencies and bring in a system where you can have a private public partnership. Now, regarding storage, as I said, we want to move in for a more efficient system like bulk storage for wheat, where we will go only for silo storage from 2025 onwards. And largely this entire silo will be coming up through public-private partnership. None of the investment will be flowing in directly from the government. So to that extent, the government will be less burdened. That is one thing. Your second question was, sir, on?
Second question was how to reduce the wastage of
Of
perishable
course,
commodities.
partly my answer to the first question also actually overlaps to the second one. When you have an efficient system, especially something like a bulk storage system of silo, and what government is actually doing is to build up the post-harvest infrastructure, especially on the cold storage side, and also the farm gate infrastructure. The schemes like Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, other schemes have brought in, which will encourage the people. A lot of schemes not only from the Agriculture Ministry. In fact, there are schemes from MOFP also, Ministry of Food Processing Industries. There are certain subsidy schemes from horticulture sector. We have a mission for integrated development of horticulture. They have got certain schemes, and there is a center for cold chain development. So of course you can't combine all the schemes together and have a subsidy, giant subsidy, but in its own, each scheme provides some kind of incentive for the private sector. In fact, it is open to even the public sector organizations, the Food Corporation of India, Central Warehousing Corporation. All these organizations also can come in, especially the cooperatives. We have about, a huge number of cooperatives in the country, in thousands, especially in states like AP, Tamil Nadu, Telangana. The cooperatives are very active. So through the cooperative sector, and the fourth one is through the FPOs. FPOs, collective farmers collectives, they can also come in. They can also participate in the infrastructure projects, avail of various benefits. And largely, before I conclude, the new model, the blended finance model, which there was a budget announcement recently, 21-22, about NABARD launching a blended finance model through for encouraging the startups. So there's a huge, promotion or incentive being given for agri startups in the country, because that is going to be the way forward. If they are going to come in and pitch in for processing, cold storage, or cold chain logistics, not just the standalone facilities, but through vehicles, and also in various sectors, animal husbandry, fisheries, dairies, because agriculture, if you see, is not just confined to production of crops. You have so many other sectors associated. So this will be the thing. And finally, of course, the political will. Of course, I didn't mention about it because I am speaking on behalf of government. There needs to be a larger political will for the reforms. If they can happen, then probably we are in the midst of elections. Two of the states are the erstwhile Green Revolution states, Punjab and Uttar Pradesh. So a lot of things actually will undermine the way forward. But
Sure.
the government is fully committed. That is there.
Sure. Thank you.